All right, we're going to be doing a solar inspection training here. This is going to be we're going to be fairly fast paced here, so we think we can get through it all. We're going to just be identifying and addressing the common challenges in solar inspections. Certainly, you can go through this more than once. You can always go back, watch it again, but I am going to try to keep it fast paced so that we can get through it. There are really only 10 major problems. That's what we've kept this list down to. So we're going to understand these key solar inspection challenges, and we're going to talk about these top 10 problems that you will likely encounter when you're conducting solar inspections. Recognizing these issues is essential for maintaining safety, optimizing performance, and ensuring longevity and long-term efficiency of the solar energy system. So they are very important. So let's jump right into it. Problem number one is going to be unsafe electrical. We've got a few examples here. One of them is solar breakers being installed too close to the main breaker. We're going to get fairly complicated right off the bat here, and then we'll kind of back it down after this. So but the main thing to understand is that the main breaker, main shutoff, main disconnect for usually the home, and the main shutoff for the solar should not be installed too close together. And we're going to talk about why that is. But the main reason is that it can overheat the bus bar, which poses a significant fire hazard. So it's important to be on the lookout for proper placement for these breakers. So let's get into some electrical discussion here. First of all, if the main breaker plus the PV breaker exceed the panel capacity, then the NEC 120% rule applies. Now, bear with me. Like I said, this does get a little bit technical, but I think it'll make sense in the end. The 120% rule allows you to put up to 120% of the bus rating worth of breaker protection if the sources are placed at opposite ends of the bus bar. So why is it important for them to be placed at opposite ends of the bus bar? Well, it spreads the load across the bus so that one section doesn't get too hot or overheat. So if you look at this diagram to the right, you can see the main breaker we have on this side of the bus bar here that's running vertical. And then we have the PV disconnect that's down at the bottom of the bus bar. And essentially these breakers in the middle are dissipating that load so that all that power is not coming in. If these are two backfed breakers, all this power is not coming into one section before that is dissipated by the breakers. So the panel max here is 200 amps, and then we would multiply that by 1.2, which is 120%, and that is 240 amps. So as long as the main breaker plus the PV breaker do not exceed 240 amps, which they do not, because 200 plus 200 plus 40 is 240, then we're good. But you do have to keep these at opposite ends of the bus because it does exceed the main panel bus max. So hope that makes sense. So the main is 200. If we're exceeding that, got to go on opposite ends. Let's talk about another scenario. If the breakers are stacked too close, this can cause excessive heat at the bus before the load is dissipated. Hopefully this makes sense. So we've got the main breaker coming in, and then the PV breaker, you can see they're right next to each other. All that load is coming into one part of the bus, and it all has to dissipate out here. So that's where you can get a hazard. Now remember that if the main breaker plus the PV breaker exceeds the 120% rule for the panel, this is an improper install and an electrician should be recommended. So an example would be if you have a 100 amp max and 100 amp main breaker, say, and then you got a 40 amp PV breaker, that would be exceeding that 120 rule. And then we'd want to recommend a qualified electrician come in and take a look. Now, if the main breaker plus the PV breaker do not exceed the panel capacity, the breaker placement is not important. So if we had, say, like an 80 amp here and a 20 amp here, and we've got a 100 amp bus max, we're not exceeding the panel bus max, and we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to worry about where they're placed. So let's just do a quick review so you can wrap your head around all of that. If the main breaker plus the PV breaker exceed the panel capacity, then placement of the breaker should be at opposite ends of the bus to spread out the load and heat. If the main breaker and the PV breaker exceed the 120% of the panel capacity, an electrician should be recommended. And lastly, to see if the 120% rule is exceeded, you would multiply panel capacity by 1.2 or 120%. And if that number exceeds the main breaker plus the PV breaker, then recommend a qualified electrician. So let's just a quick example here, and then we'll wrap up all the technical talk. Let's say the panel capacity is 100 amps. We're going to multiply that by 1.2, and that's going to equal 120 amps. Now in this scenario, if we have a main breaker of 120 amps multiplied by a PV breaker or plus a PV breaker of 40 amps, that would equal 140 amps. In this case, the 120% rule is exceeded. Now this says this is a multiplication sign. It should be a plus sign here. All right, let's move on to the second one. Now that we got the technical talk out of the way, hopefully that makes sense. You can go back and rewatch it and try to wrap your head around it. The other one is solar breaker missing a handle tie. Now this is very common on home inspections in general, is that if you have a 240 amp breaker, it should have a handle tie. That way when one breaker trips, both of them trip. So make sure you're looking for that. Almost always your PV backfed breakers are going to be 240 volt. So you want to make sure that it does have a handle tie. Broken meter collars, be on the lookout for that. If they're broken and not secured, this can create vulnerabilities, risk of tampering, shock incidents, potential utility hazards, which necessitates immediate attention. All right, problem number 2, missing solar labels. Solar systems should be labeled. There are requirements for them. They do need a system map with disconnect locations like you see on the bottom left here. They need labels indicating solar presence. So warning, solar electric. Solar disconnects need to be clearly marked. It's very important. Stickers marked on solar conduits. This ensures first responders can easily identify solar circuits in emergency situations. So risk of missing or incorrect labels. So in contrast, missing or incorrectly placed labels can create significant risk. Insufficient labeling may lead to confusion during emergencies, delayed response times, and potentially jeopardizing safety. Sometimes they're faded, painted over, entirely missing, and that complicates the identification of the solar circuits when quick action is required. So it's important that you are looking for these. The 4 listed here is what's required, and noting them accordingly. Number 3 is going to be the fire code setbacks and pathway violations for solar. These are pretty straightforward, and if you think of it from a practical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Essentially, we're talking about first responders coming on site and being able to access certain sections of the roof for firefighting or rescue. So we need to have an eave to ridge path. That is a requirement. So as you can see, if I come up to the front of the house, I pitch a ladder here, I need to be able to get up to the ridge. There needs to be a 36-inch pathway from eave to ridge on one side of the solar panels. Okay, that's very important. It's best to have that in the front of the house. And again, you're thinking about this from a practical standpoint, is if first responders come on site, can they easily access the ridge? If you have a fence around the backyard and no access on the front, but you got it on the back, doesn't really create easy access. You may want to recommend it. You should also consider excessive obstruction. So if there's large plumbing vents, a chimney, some type of ventilation that impedes the path, although there's 36 inches, that could become a trip hazard and a potential risk to first responders. There should also be a path along the ridge. 18-inch pathway is what's required. This increases to 36 if the panels cover more than 1/3 of the roof slope. Again, all goes back to emergency responders. And then, of course, egress windows. This is just a practical, kind of common sense thing. If you have an egress window, you need to be able to get out of it and come down from the eave. So, or someone to get up and get in to help rescue. So you don't want to block egress windows. That could trap occupants during emergencies and kind of defeat the purpose of that being a safety route. You need a 36-inch path in front of egress windows. Okay, number 4, trees affecting panels. This is pretty obvious when you think about it. You shouldn't have shade on your solar panels. Kind of defeats the purpose. So even minor shading, and you should be looking at things, maybe you're on the home inspection more in the morning, but look at, okay, where's the sun going to go in the afternoon, maybe in the winter, maybe in the summer. Are we going to see shading issues at any point due to trees that are surrounding? And then you can note that so that they can do some tree trimming and maximize the efficiency of their expensive solar system. Of course, overhanging trees or trees nearby can also cause damage because they can fall in high winds or storms, and that can damage solar panels, which could become quite costly. So recommend trimming trees well away from the solar panels. Problem number 5 is loose or damaged wires under the panels. You do want to get down there and kind of take a look. This is really common. You can see the 2 pictures here of wires just hanging out on the panels. There's a lot of risks involved with that. They're vulnerable to UV exposure. That can degrade the insulation, and it can also lead to fire or shock hazards. Additionally, they can rub the roof, which causes frictions. That can damage roofs like asphalt shingle roofs, so it starts to rub the granules away, and it can also damage the insulation on the wires. And again, we're back to risk of electrical failure and fire. If you degrade these wires enough, it's not going to be able to carry the current, and then again, you're not getting efficiency out of the system. Problem number 6 is improper roof attachment and flashing. It's very important that the solar panels are properly attached to the roof. If they are, and these are mainly going to be inspected from the attic, especially this picture over on the left. If you see, these are called shiners. If you see a bolt that's not properly seated into the structural member, not only can that cause structural concerns of the solar panels and the way that they are attached, they can become dislodged in heavy winds, etc. But also, oftentimes that will lead to leaks, believe it or not. Needless to say, flashing is also very important. So some solar panel installations are designed to have this flashing that goes up underneath the shingles. Others are just sealant based, so just sealant around the bolts. Either way, you want to be inspecting for that, making sure that there are no signs of issues when it comes to water intrusion, both on the roof and when you're inside the house. Problem number 7, debris buildup on and under the panels. So even light debris like this can affect efficiency. You obstruct sunlight, you reduce output. Pretty straightforward there. So you definitely want to be noting if there is dirt buildup, leaves buildup, moss, pine needles, anything that can obstruct sunlight will decrease the energy production of the system, and you'll want to recommend cleaning. Moisture buildup leads to damage, so anything that gets trapped underneath the panels, this should be clean and clear underneath the panels. Not only can it degrade the roof, but an increased risk of leaks, but can also cause long-term damage to both the solar system and the roof structure. And of course, you get pine needles that build up around here. Those can be used for nesting. You can get rodents under there, birds under there. it poses a fire risk. Overheating and can compromise the effectiveness of the solar energy system. So these panels, you really don't want to, anytime they get really hot, you do sacrifice some efficiency. So having it to where there's less airflow underneath is going to cause them to get hotter than they should be. It's going to reduce efficiency and production. So regular maintenance is very important. And trimming trees back to where you're not having that recur. Problem number 8 is pest activity on and under the panels. This is definitely something to be looking for. Birds are very common pest to solar panels. They like to potentially nest underneath. They will hang out on top, and it's important to install anti-bird and rodent devices in some cases. The nesting debris can cause overheating. We just talked about that with the pine needles from the last example. Droppings actually can cause corrosion on the glass surfaces, so it can damage the panels over time. So we want to make sure that's cleaned off and that it's not recurring. And then rodents can chew on the wires. They love chewing on wires, and they can cause damage and fire risk, obviously. So if you do see signs of pests, you want to recommend installation of anti-pest devices. That can certainly help mitigate this issue. We've got a couple depicted here in this right photo. You can see there's a net around the panel, and then we've also got these spikes used to mitigate bird activity. Problem number 9 is panel clamps not secured. You can see in this picture, the solar panels have slid down to this flatter section of the roof because they weren't properly secured. That can cause them to detach in high winds, potentially resulting in property damage and, most importantly, injury to personnel on the ground. Panels can also rattle and shift and create penetration leaks in the roofing, lead to water damage and structural integrity issues. So you want to make sure they're properly secured to their attachments. On the right here, you can see this is a very common clamp situation. We've got a bolt, the nut there, and it should be holding these panels down. You can lift up on them slightly, make sure everything is tight and not moving at all. Would highly recommend that, but certainly be doing a visual inspection of these clamps to make sure that everything is properly secured down and that they are all present and none of them are missing or loose. And last but not least, the most obvious of them all is damaged panels. Very common around golf courses is to see damage from golf balls. Maybe kids are playing baseball in the yard. Baseball gets up here. We already talked about tree branches affecting solar panels. So you will typically see that pretty obviously when you're looking at the panels that there is damage. You'll want to note that. It can compromise efficiency and cause inability to harness sunlight effectively. And then, of course, there are risks of electrical shorts. So water intrusion and broken solar panels can create electrical shorts and may result in total system failure, posing safety risks to users and property. So certainly something you want to note and they want to get taken care of. All right, we're wrapping up here. We're just going to recap these 10 most common issues. So we talked about the unsafe electrical, the missing solar labels. So we want everything to be labeled. Roof fire code pathway violations for first responders. Number 4 is trees affecting the solar panels from shading and damage. We got loose or damaged wires under the panels. Number 6, improper roof attachment and or flashing. Number 7, debris buildup on or under the panels. And number 8, pest activity on or under the panels. Number 9, make sure everything is secured properly. Get this back here. And we've got number 10, which is damaged panels. So those are the 10 most common issues. Definitely be looking out for all of those and noting them as necessary. There are a few additional here I wanted to touch on. Sometimes wires can get damaged due to roof rub or pests. We talked really about that. But also water tight seals on conduit and junction boxes. You do want to be inspecting junction boxes, make sure water's not getting in there, and that everything, the gaskets are good. The junction boxes are properly secured. You also want to be looking at the conduit penetration and sealant flashing. So, the conduit usually is run along the roof. Those are going to be screwed down with some type of clamp. You want to make sure that those penetrations are properly sealed. And then, of course, with anything with a home inspection, anything that looks odd or out of the ordinary, should be investigating that and making sure that it's not going to cause major problems. So just real quick here, because you will be consulting your clients on solar systems, talking them through how the solar inspection went. We want to talk about essential maintenance for solar systems real quick so that you have some talking points as you're doing your recaps. So, of course, with anything, regular maintenance is crucial to ensure the optimal performance and longevity of solar energy systems. You should be proactive about trimming trees, preventing shading, cleaning panels every 1 to 3 years to maximize sunlight exposure. Of course, this can be done on condition, but you certainly want to be monitoring them, making sure that they aren't getting a coating of debris, dust, or buildup on them so that you are getting maximum efficiency. I would always recommend inspecting about every 2 years to identify potential issues. Reactive measures should be taken as needed, such as replacing faulty inverters, securing loose clips and wires, and removing debris that could impede system performance. A few conclusions and best practices. Wrapping it up here. Takeaways for maintaining systems effectively. Ongoing maintenance should include regular inspections and maintenance. They are crucial to ensuring optimal performance and safety of the solar system. Every 1 to 3 years, I would recommend cleaning solar panels and trimming nearby trees to prevent shading. And this should be scheduled, again, every 1 to 3 years. And then as needed, replace inverters, secure loose wires promptly to avoid hazards and ensure reliability. And if you're doing your inspections every couple of years, 1 to 2 years, you are going to be finding these issues early before they cause too much damage. So I would always recommend that if someone's getting a solar system installed, that they have it inspected afterwards. Make sure it was installed properly. It's the best time for them to get the installers back is right after they install it, not 2 or 3 years later. Anytime there's a point of sale, you should verify safety and compliance before the home changes hands. All right, that wraps up the solar inspection training and talking about the most common challenges in solar inspections. Pretty straightforward of what you're going to run into. These are the top 10. Of course, there's more, but we wanted to keep it simple. And I think this really covers the vast majority of what you're going to run into on a regular basis. So I do hope it helps. And thanks so much for watching.